Hi girls. This video corresponds with chapter 2, section 3, centrally planned economies. So if you remember, we are learning about different economic systems. Section 2 is about free markets. We also learned about the traditional economy, which was the very primitive one. So today we're going to go through centrally planned economies. So this is in direct contrast to the free market system. So centrally planned economies oppose private property, free market pricing, competition, and consumer choice. Okay, so in a centrally planned economy, who answers the three key economic questions? And the answer to that is the government. Okay, so the central government, or we could just say the government, answers every economic question about production and consumption. Individual producers and consumers have no say in the economy. Okay, so if you could boil down this whole lesson to what a centrally planned economy is that the government is in charge. Okay, so they make all the decisions about what to produce, how to produce them, who gets them once they're produced. They own everything. They own both the land and the capital. They control where people work and what they're paid. Okay, so if you're already thinking, this doesn't sound like something that I would like to participate in, you're right. This is usually the tenet of, communism, where the government is in control of everything. So, we're going to learn more about the different ideologies behind centrally planned, but it's really just the government's making all the decision. It's very red tape and a lot of red tape involved. And it can also be known as a command economy. Okay, so again, they are controlling all the factor resources in production. They own both the land and the capital. And it also owns the labor. Okay, you do not have the freedom to choose your career, your job. You're told what to do, and then you're also told you will receive this wage for your work. Okay, so if you are a farmer, you're told what to plant, how to plant it, where to send the crops once you harvest them. There's absolutely zero self-interest. There's no market forces of competition at work. Okay, so this is just one example of how this government control of factor resources and production is working in a command economy or centrally planned economy. This is about the production of sweaters. Okay, the government is deciding what to produce, I should say. Are they going to produce sweaters or are they going to produce military uniforms? Okay, so they have these planners, and when I say planners, you could swap that out. They're all government officials. So these government officials decide that more military uniforms than sweaters will be made this year, this month, whatever the time frame is. Okay? That decision to make military uniforms is sent to the Materials Committee. Again, another government-owned entity, government employees. Then that Materials Committee will see how much cotton is available. They decide how many sweaters will be made and how many military uniforms will be made. And then they send their decision to the cotton makers, the button makers, and elastic makers, right? So all of those materials then arrive at the sweater factories and the uniform factories, and they're made into, the two products. So again, this is just a very simple example, but in a centrally planned economy, all of the production decisions are not determined by consumers. What if we don't want sweaters this season? What if we want more jackets? What if we want more raincoats, right? We have no say. It's all up to these government officials, okay? So there's no consumer sovereignty in a centrally planned economy. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, you might be saying to yourself, well, this rings of communism, right? It also has tenets of socialism, but, it's not the same thing. They're different systems. So socialism is a social political philosophy based on the belief that democratic means should be able to distribute wealth evenly throughout a society. So socialists argue that, economic equity can only exist if the centers of that power are controlled by the government or the public as a whole, meaning that it doesn't necessarily have a bad or negative connotation. It's just that in order to make sure that everyone's getting their piece of the pie, that everything's being distributed equally, you and I couldn't make sure that was happening, right? So there has to be, some government involvement in order to facilitate that. Okay, so, there are countries that have, it might not be pure socialism, but they do have tenets of it. And again, you'll have that distribution of wealth through the government. So communism has a much more negative connotation. It's a political system, again, characterized by that centrally planned economy, where, again, the government is in control. The government owns and controls all the resources. And, communists, though, the government is authoritarian, right? So socialism is, that's not necessarily the case. So communists require strict obedience for their citizens. So, it's a dictator, or a small group of people in power. And again, there's no individual freedoms or actions. It's really just that dictator or that small group of leaders in charge. So you can think of North Korea today, the former Soviet Union, etc. I don't want to go too much into this, to be honest, just because, again, this was the former Soviet Union and how their economy was run at the time. But it's really just a reinforcement of what I mentioned earlier, what the presentation earlier said, that all of these decisions were coming from the government. They owned all the factor resources, including the labor. And, that's why it can be categorized as a centrally planned economy. And I'm going to skip over this as well. This is just a little outline of Chinese communism, which I don't think is really pertinent to our lesson today. So when we look at these centrally planned economies, so again, boiled down to the government in control, I think it's pretty easy to see the flaws or the disadvantages here, right? So if you think back to those economic goals that each country or each society would rank, right? What did they hold more valuable than others, or, higher than others on their list? We could see a lot of flaws with this system, right? So economic efficiency. Is this efficient? No, right? I mean, there's very little efficiency. Again, the government is owning all the production factors. And workers are lacking incentives, right? So if you're a worker, if you go back to that farming example, if the government is telling you you can only produce 50 bushels of wheat a day, okay? That's all you're going to do. You're not going to make more money if you produce, 60 bushels of wheat a day. So there's no incentive to, improve your process, improve your work ethic. So it's just really, really inefficient. Economic freedom, I think we can all say there's zero, okay? The government is making all the decisions. There's no growth, okay? Because again, there's no incentives to be better, to work longer hours, to try to get a promotion, right? You're not even allowed to choose your own job. So there's no growth involved. And then lastly, of course, economic equity. There is equity because, the theory is that everyone's going to get the same, right? Everyone's going to get the same amount. But this was proven in, communist societies that, in fact, not everyone was equal. Those government officials were receiving way more products. They had a wider variety of goods to choose from. And the average everyday worker, consumer, was left with shortages and very, very little products and goods to choose from. So again, this just also highlights what the disadvantages are, you had that large bureaucracy. Like when you think about that sweater and military uniform example, like why do they need, one committee and then the materials committee and then the button committee and then the zipper committee, right? It was just way too many cooks in the kitchen, making these thousands of decisions, and it just became so cumbersome, lacks flexibility, and of course never adjusting to consumer demands, right? Because there's no consumers aren't able, like in a free market enterprise, to send signals for what they want or don't want, because there's just no consumer sovereignty in this system. So again, overall, these disadvantages really, shine through. And, in theory, again, like everyone's supposed to get the same amount. So that would be, this society, like a functioning society where we're all equal. There's no poverty, we all have everything that we need. But it really didn't meet everyone's needs and wants. So what happened is that most centrally planned economies or communist nations eventually moved towards mixed economies over the past 20 years. So if you could guess, our next lesson will be just on that, the fourth type of economic system that we're going to look at, a mixed economy.